The night begins quietly. Outside, the wind curls against high castle walls, where a thin light flickers through arrow-slit windows. You can almost hear the slow, deliberate footsteps of a guard making his rounds, and the soft, distant hum of a court musician practicing a melody for tomorrow's feast. Inside, behind heavy curtains embroidered with gold thread, the queen sits still, not in luxury, but in silence. The air smells faintly of beeswax and rose oil. The chamber is grand, yes, but also cold. Its stones old and damp. Its echoes sharp enough to remind her how alone she is in all that finery. Being queen, in the stories told to children, sounds like the softest kind of dream. A life of jewels and silk, of maids attending to every wish, of kings who listen and poets who sing your name. But in truth, in the quiet of these real medieval nights, it was a crown of weight more than of beauty. It was a life watched, measured, and rarely one's own. Most queens were never chosen by love. They were chosen like land, like treaties, like fragile bridges between kingdoms at war. Their fathers signed papers and sealed them with wax. Their faces, described in letters, were judged by strangers before they were ever seen in person. And then one morning, with barely time to pack a dowry, they were sent away, a girl on a horse, leaving behind her mother, her home, and her language. Imagine being 17, riding 4 weeks through muddy roads, toward a fortress where everyone speaks words you barely understand. At each stop, someone bows, someone whispers, and someone studies your smile. Even before you arrive, you are already a symbol, not a person, but a promise that peace will hold. And peace, in those days, was always trembling. When she first steps into her new court, everything feels heavy. The gowns, the rules, the watchful eyes. A queen must sit with grace, speak only when spoken to, and smile even when her heart wants to cry. Every motion becomes a kind of performance, the careful tilt of a head, the practiced warmth in a glance. She learns to breathe quietly, to hide the ache of newness. She learns that even laughter can be dangerous too much, and it seems improper. Too little, and it seems cold. The court is a world built of whispers. The courtiers, noblemen, ladies-in-waiting, ambassadors all play their games in soft tones and folded hands. Every friendship can be a risk. Every kindness, a transaction. The queen is expected to charm them, but never too much. To listen, but never to reveal. To speak, but always to please. At night, when the torch is dim and only the crackle of the hearth remains, she takes off her jewels, one by one, and sets them up on the table. Their weight leaves marks on her skin, faint circles where the metal pressed too tightly. Those marks fade by morning, but others stay longer. The quiet bruises of duty, the small sacrifices that no one applauds. Even the clothes that look like dreams. Those long velvet gowns, embroidered in silver and gold, were heavy, suffocating things. A full court dress could weigh 20 pounds or more, layered with underskirts, corsetry, and trains that trailed behind her like a shadow she could never step free from. And all of it was meant to remind the world of her importance, her purity, her perfection, a living symbol, wrapped in discomfort. The irony is that her life, for all its grandeur, belonged to everyone but her. Her letters were read before they were sent. Her children, when born, were not hers to raise. They were heirs to a kingdom first, sons or daughters second. Her health was discussed by counselors, her meals prepared by tasters who feared poison more than hunger. Even her body was public property, its purpose decided by politics. Yet still, the image of the queen endured serene, noble, untouched by the mud of the world around her. The poets sang of her beauty. Though they had never seen her without the crown, the people bowed, believing she lived a life beyond their reach. Only those who served close, the maids who brushed her hair at dawn, the women who laced her corset, knew that sometimes she wept while no one was looking. And if she was lucky, she might have a single friend, perhaps a lady in waiting from her homeland, someone who shared her tongue and her memories of rivers and songs far away. They would whisper softly after the candles were blown out, sharing small stories of home, not politics, not duty, just warmth. And then, when morning came, the friendship would dissolve again into protocol, for even affection had to hide beneath layers of ceremony. In the great halls, she sat beside her husband, the king, but even there, she was often silent. Her opinions, if offered, had to be careful. Too bold, and she might be called dangerous. Too meek, and she might be dismissed as useless. So she learned the art of subtle influence, the gentle word at the right time, the quiet persuasion wrapped in humility. It was a kind of power, yes, but it was the kind that left you weary. Outside, her subjects might look up at the towers and dream of her life. Inside, she often looked out at them and envied theirs, the ability to walk freely, to laugh loudly, to be forgotten when they wished, to be small enough that no one watched them sleep. And so, as the candle burns low in her chamber, and the night folds softly around the castle walls, she sits for a while in stillness. She looks at the tapestry on the wall, scenes of battles, saints, and angels, and wonders if anyone will ever weave her story, not the one of crowns and marriages and heirs, but the one of quiet endurance, of unseen grace. The kind of story that never makes it into the history books, but lives instead in the silence between their lines. The mornings after a royal wedding were always bright with noise. Bells would ring from the church towers, and the city below would fill with color and cheers. But for the queen, that first morning marked not a celebration, but the beginning of expectation. From the moment she arrived at court, the whispers began. When would the kingdom have its heir? Would it be a boy? Would she be strong enough to give the king what he needed? A son to hold the throne, and a spare to secure it. She could be graceful, educated, kind, even wise beyond her years. But none of it mattered as much as the quiet, invisible work of her body. In the eyes of the council, she was not only a queen, she was a vessel for stability. Each month that passed without news of pregnancy brought a subtle change in the air. The ladies of the court smiled just as warmly, but their eyes lingered longer. The king's advisors murmured to one another about omens, blessings, and the health of the royal line. Priests offered prayers, physicians prepared tonics, and the queen, though still so young, began to carry the weight of a nation's impatience. The rituals of fertility were strange and endless. She was made to eat certain herbs, to drink wine infused with powdered pearl, to visit chapels and lay offerings before saints. Sometimes she was told to rest more, other times to walk daily in the gardens. Everyone had an opinion, but no one asked her how she felt. The ache of hope, the quiet fear each time her waiting ended in silence. When at last a queen conceived, the news spread like fire through the kingdom. Bells again, feasts, prayers, but now came another kind of fear. For childbirth was perilous, and even the highest crown could not protect her from nature's risks. The chambers would be sealed, midwives summoned, relics placed upon pillows, and outside, the court would wait, listening for the sound of a cry, not hers, but the child's. If that cry was strong, and if the child was a boy, joy burst through the palace like sunlight through rain. The queen's place, at least for a while, was secure. But if the child was a girl, the silence that followed could be long and cold. She would smile, of course, smile for the courtiers, for the people, but deep inside she knew the murmurs had already begun again. It wasn't her fault, though she was made to feel it. No one yet knew the science of inheritance, yet the blame, somehow, always fell upon her. Some queens bore daughter after daughter, and each birth widened the space between them and their husbands. The king, guided by his counsel, might take a mistress, or worse, seek an annulment. The queen's chamber, once filled with music and midwives, could become a lonely place, and so she turned to prayer, or to poetry, or sometimes to silence. The walls knew her secrets, the names of babies who never lived, the small sighs that came at night when no one else was listening. In a world that saw her body as a duty, grief was a private rebellion. Still, there were moments of gentleness. A newborn daughter in her arms, soft and warm, her tiny fingers curling around the queen's ring. In those quiet hours before the court remembered its rules, the queen could be only a mother. She would hum songs from her childhood, old tunes from her homeland, letting the rhythm of them wash away the distance between her and who she once was. Some queens did find a kind of strength in this endless trial. They learned to wear serenity like armor. They learned that motherhood, even when judged, could be an act of quiet defiance, a way of shaping compassion in a world ruled by cold ambition. But many others were not so fortunate. History remembers them as barren, as castasida, as replaced by younger brides who might succeed where they had not. And yet, behind those dry words, divorced, set aside, behind heavy doors. Imagine the silence of those rooms. The queen sitting near the window, her crown gone, her reflection soft in the glass. Outside, snow falls gently on the courtyard. Inside, she wonders if she will be remembered for anything more than what she could not give. And still, the kingdom moves on. The bells will ring for another bride one day, and the old queen's name will fade from the songs. But history, the kind that whispers, not the kind that shouts, keeps her somewhere deep within it. In every portrait, in every faded letter, there's a trace of that unseen sorrow. For all the beauty of the throne, for all its silk and gold, the truest truth of queenship was that a woman's worth was measured in heirs, and yet she had no control over life itself. It was a cruel equation, written by men, enforced by faith, and endured by those whose smiles became the kingdom's illusion of peace. And when the night finally came, the long, candlelit nights between hope and despair, she would look at the cradle beside her bed, sometimes filled, sometimes empty, and whisper prayers not for glory, but for rest. Because even queens, especially queens, longed for the quiet mercy of sleep. The queen wakes before dawn. The first sound she hears is not birdsong, nor the gentle hum of morning wind, but the creak of the chamber door as her attendants enter. Soft footsteps on stone, whispers about water being warmed, fabric being laid out. Her day has begun, not by her own rhythm, but by duty's schedule. Even her rising is ceremonial. A maid draws back the heavy curtains. Another brings a basin of rose water. A third kneels to arrange her slippers. Everything has meaning. Every motion, an echo of hierarchy. The queen moves through it all with practiced grace. Her silence is her armor. There are always eyes on her, even in these intimate hours. And she's long since learned to hide her fatigue beneath a calm face. In the great courts of Europe, privacy was considered dangerous. A queen left alone too long might think her own thoughts, and thoughts could lead to rebellion, or worse, to influence unapproved. So there were always watchers, ladies in waiting who were loyal. Yes, but also servants who bowed, but listened. Guards who were there to protect, and to ensure she never wandered too far. Every letter she wrote could be opened before it reached its destination. Every conversation she had could be repeated in soft or sharpened form. Even her smiles could be read as political gestures, too warm toward one nobleman, and a rumor might bloom by nightfall. To survive, she learned to speak in layers. One sentence for the listener, another beneath it for those who knew her heart. The castle itself seemed to conspire in this vigilance. Long corridors where sound carried easily, chambers with doors that didn't quite close, walls that held echoes like secrets. The queen's world was built not of comfort, but of surveillance, dressed in gold. She was a living symbol, beautiful to behold, but never free to act unseen. Imagine, for a moment, her sitting in the royal chapel, 1,000 candles trembling before the altar, the courtiers behind her, murmuring prayers she can barely hear. She closes her eyes, not to pray, but to escape. For a few heartbeats, she imagines what silence would feel like, real silence, the kind that belongs only to oneself. But then a cough breaks the spell, and she remembers she is never truly alone. Her days are filled with duties that seem light, but drain her steadily. Receiving ambassadors, attending feasts, hosting the noble ladies of the realm. Always poised, always smiling, never revealing weariness or boredom. To be a queen was to perform endurance, to look graceful even when one's heart was heavy, to listen to flattery without flinching, to be adored and yet invisible at the same time. There were women who found subtle freedoms in this gilded confinement. Some turned to books, illuminated manuscripts smuggled into their chambers, poetry written under false initials. Others found solace in gardens, where the rhythm of nature whispered of simpler lives. A few took comfort in music, the gentle pluck of a lute, the echo of voices singing soft Latin hymns that made the air shimmer with peace. And then there were those who dared to dream of influence. They learned how to move through the court's currents, how to bend the king's ear, how to guide decisions without ever appearing to command. They traded favors like delicate currency, their words wrapped in sweetness but edged with wisdom. It was dangerous work, but it was the only way to carve a small shape of freedom within the walls. Yet even that had limits. For every queen who succeeded in being heard, there were many who were silenced, accused of meddling, of witchcraft, of corrupt. The same intelligence that might make a man respected could make a woman feared. So she learned to walk the narrow path between grace and suspicion, her mind alive with unspoken thoughts. At night, when the feasts were over and the candles burned low, she would look at her reflection in a polished piece of metal. Not quite a mirror, but close enough. She would study her face and wonder if she still recognized it. The crown left marks on her scalp, faint indentations that pulsed with ache. Even her hair smelled of incense and wax, as if the castle itself had claimed her scent. Sometimes, in the deep hours before dawn, she would walk quietly to the window and watch the torches flicker on the outer walls. The guards stood in stillness, shadows against the stone, and she would think, they are free in ways I am not. For they may move unseen. They may breathe without ceremony. Still, she knew her role. She understood that her restraint was the kingdom's illusion of peace. Her composure was political stability. If she faltered, the gossip would become unrest. And so, even when her heart longed for solitude, she held herself upright beneath the weight of that invisible duty. In the stories written later, the chronicles of kings and their reigns, she appears often as an ornament. His queen attended. The queen gave birth. The queen interceded. Brief mentions, as if she were a shadow in someone else's light. But beneath those small lines were entire lives of patience and perhaps quiet rebellion. A woman learning, day by day, to live behind her own eyes. The crown she wore was gold, yes, but it was also a cage, finely wrought, delicately shining, but built to confine. And she, within it, became both captive and symbol, the face of power and the prisoner of it. As the night deepens, the sounds of the castle fade, the last footsteps, the distant toll of a bell marking midnight. In her chamber, the queen sits once more beside her window. The stars outside seem close enough to touch, yet unreachable like the freedom she dreams of but cannot claim. And in that soft stillness, between breath and sigh, the crown gleams faintly beside her, a circle of light and of limits. The days lengthen, the bells mark their hours, and still the queen moves through them like a figure painted into a page of illuminated parchment boot. Still, and always surrounded by space that belongs to everyone but herself. It is in that space that loneliness grows. Not the simple kind that comes from being alone, but the deeper kind that comes from being seen constantly, yet never known. At court, every word is an echo of duty. The courtiers bow, the priests bless, the maids murmur your grace. All of it is polite, distant, precise, but none of it is real closeness. The queen smiles, and the world answers back with ceremony. She has attendants who lace her gown each morning, but they do not look her in the eyes for long. She has a husband, but he speaks of treaties and battles, not of the soft things that two hearts might share. She sits beside him at feasts, her hand near his on the table, yet their minds wandered down different roads. Sometimes, when the hall is loud with music and laughter, she feels the loneliness most sharply. She watches the dances swirl, the torches flicker, the goblets tilt in joy, and she thinks I am in the very center of the crowd, and yet I am nowhere within it. Letters arrive from other courts. A cousin in Spain, a childhood friend in France, a sister now married to another prince. Their words speak of gardens, of new children, of summer storms. She reads them slowly, tracing the shapes of the handwriting, breathing in the faint scent of wax and travel. And for a few moments she feels the nearness of another life, one that might have been hers. Then she folds the parchment, seals it, and sets it aside. Another small ache pressed between pages. The only time the court ever falls silent enough for her thoughts is at dusk. The servants withdraw, the corridors cool, and the last light of the sun spills through the high windows in soft gold ribbons. She will sit by the hearth, unpinned hair falling over her shoulders, and listen to the fire whisper. Sometimes, in that light, she almost feels ordinary again, just a woman sitting quietly, watching the day turn to night. But the stillness does not last. The door creaks. A lady in waiting enters, bringing word of tomorrow's council, tomorrow's feast, tomorrow's mask. The queen nods, smiles, dismisses her kindly, and when the door closes again, she breathes out a sigh that no one will hear. There are rare souls who see her differently. Perhaps a maid from her homeland who still calls her by the old familiar name, whispered quickly when no one else is near, or a physician who speaks gently, remembering she is human before she is royal. These smokiness as brief as candle flames are. What sustain her? They are reminders that beyond the crown, there is still a pulse, a self. Sometimes, a poet will be invited to court. He will read verses about love that defies fate, about longing that crosses oceans. The queen will sit very still, but inside, her heart will echo each line. Later that night she might repeat a few words softly to herself, the way one repeats a prayer. Not for comfort, exactly, but to keep the inner world alive, the secret garden that no law or counsel can take. The loneliness of queenship was rarely spoken of, yet it threaded through centuries like a hidden current. Some queens turned that solitude into faith, surrounding themselves with nuns and chapels, their prayers rising in the scent of frankincense. Others found companionship in books, commissioning stories of distant heroines who were brave and free. and a few simply endured each day, a quiet discipline of grace. For the queen in our story, it becomes a rhythm. Morning, composure, day duty, evening, reflection, night, the long stretch of thought before sleep. She learns to find comfort in small things, the soft fur of a lapdog, the steady tick of a clock, the hush that falls when snow begins outside the window. There is beauty in her world, yes, but it is a beauty that belongs to others. Her smile is for the people, her jewels for the court, her words for history. Only the silence belongs to her, and she guards it carefully. Sometimes she dreams of walking barefoot through a meadow. No guards, no attendants, just the sound of her own footsteps in grass. In the dream, no one calls her Your Majesty. She is simply herself, unnamed and unburdened. When she wakes, for a brief moment, she believes the dream's cool air still clings to her skin. Then the door opens, and the morning ritual begins again. And yet, even within that loneliness, something enduring glows quietly, a kind of strength born from stillness. The queen learns to carry her solitude with dignity. She learns that in the spaces between applause and silence, there is wisdom. She learns that gentleness, though often mistaken for weakness, is its own form of power. The crown may cage her, but within that cage she has built a small, bright world of thought and memory. And that, too, is a kind of freedom unseen, but real. Now the castle sleeps. The torches along the walls burn low. The queen, at her window, watches the stars drift slowly westward. Somewhere, beyond the hills, dawn is waiting, patient as she has always been. And for a moment, she feels less alone. The morning bells ring long before the sun crests the hills. In the chill blue light, servants hurry through corridors with candles cupped in their hands. The castle stirs, the kitchens breathe, smoke. The courtiers begin to gather, and at the center of all this motion, the queen wakes into stillness. Duty begins before her eyes even open. A lady enters softly, bowing low to draw the curtains and whisper the schedule for the day. The king's council at dawn, the envoy from a neighboring realm at midday, and in the evening a feast for the nobles who demand to be seen. Each hour already belongs to someone else. While her gown is fastened and her hair woven into its intricate pattern, she remains motionless, her mind moving far ahead. There will be decisions to make, political, ceremonial, and subtle, each must be delivered in perfect grace. A queen's error is never her own. It is the nation's shame. A queen's weariness is never her own. It is hidden beneath silk and pearls. In the medieval world, power was rarely a comfort. It was a mask of duty so large it could consume the woman beneath it. Kings were expected to fight, to rage, to rule with fire. Queens were expected to smooth the edges of that fire, to be the cool hand on the iron crown. But this, too, was battle quieter, slower, and fought not with swords, but with silence and restraint. When the council convenes, she takes her seat beside the king, her expression perfectly serene. The lords argue about borders, the treasurer speaks of coin, and the bishop warns of divine All eyes, at intervals, turn toward her, waiting for her calm approval, her subtle nod, her words that might tilt the balance without seeming to. This is the art of being queen. To influence without appearing to command. Sometimes her advice must come cloaked in gentleness. Perhaps, my lord, we might consider, would it not please the court if each phrase is a thread she weaves into the tapestry of the room, delicate, deliberate. Too strong a pull, and it unravels. Too soft, and it goes unseen. She knows the stakes well. A single wrong word can birth a rumor. A rumor can sour an alliance, and an alliance lost may bring war. The queen's restraint is therefore not meekness, it is armor made of patience. And so she learns the rhythm of politics, as others might learn a prayer. Every pause has weight. Every glance carries meaning. When to speak, when to smile, when to let silence do the work. Her composure becomes her greatest weapon, and in time, her burden. Outside the council chamber, the world does not rest. Famines spread, peasants rise, noblesse scheme. Sometimes, a rebellion whispers her name, the foreign queen. They say, the one who meddles. She is both revered and blamed, and neither truth belongs wholly to her. The crown she wears gleams for the people, but beneath it, she feels the press of its thorns. When wars begin, they rarely reach her hand directly, yet they reach her heart in quiet ways. The king rides to battle. She stays behind to hold the realm's peace. Letters arrive from the front, distant, formal, edged with the smoke of war. Victory may be near, he writes, if God wills. She reads these words by candlelight, while the wind outside claws at the shutters. Her pulse beats with worry, but her face must remain tranquil for the court. The people look to her as the symbol of calm. To waver would be to betray them. Sometimes she visits the chapel alone. There, amid the scent of old stone and flickering candles, she kneels and prays not, always for victory, but for mercy, for the soldiers who march barefoot through snow, for the widows waiting by hearths, for a world that demands so much from its women and still calls them fragile. It is in these moments that duty feels heaviest, not when she must smile before the nobles, but when she must keep faith for everyone else. The queen's task is not only to reign but to endure, to hold still while others rage, to believe that her calm can keep the realm from shattering. When the wars end, the celebrations begin. Trumpets sound, banners rise, feasts overflow. The queen stands beside her husband, smiling through the roar of joy. Yet behind her eyes, she counts the missing faces, the knights who did not return, the children who will never know their fathers. No one sees that quiet mourning. It is not part of the spectacle. She simply bows her head, raises her goblet, and gives thanks aloud. It is strange, she thinks, how much of queenship is an act of performance. Even grief must be graceful. Even fear must wear dignity's mask. In public, she is unshakable. In private, she is only human. But the world rarely grants her the right to be both. At night, when the feasts end and the torches fade, she removes her jewels one by one. Each gem falls into its velvet box with a soft, final sound, and she feels lighter, though only slightly. The crown remains, invisible but unyielding, a circle of expectation that never truly leaves her brow. In that quiet space, she sometimes wonders, who is she without her duty? A question she cannot answer, for the world has never allowed her to find out. And yet, in the soft dark of her chamber, she lets the question drift through her like a prayer. Perhaps one day, she thinks, history will see queens not only as symbols, but as souls. And perhaps that will be enough. Outside, the wind sighs along the battlements. The castle sleeps once more, held in the steady rhythm of its heartbeat spells. Footsteps, silence, and the queen, Heber watchful, prepares for another dawn of composure. The corridors of the castle breathe with whispers. They move like drafts of air, soft, unseen, but always there. In the quiet turns between chambers, behind tapestries, in the hush of the servants' hall, voices linger where the queen cannot step without being noticed. A queen in medieval times was never truly alone. Even her solitude was observed. Behind her walls stood eyes loyal to others, lords, bishops, foreign envoisal, trying to learn what the queen might think, whom she might favor, whom she might secretly despise. Power, in those days, was not just won by armies or gold. It was shaped by what people believed, and belief was built from rumor. The queen had learned long ago that silence could be her ally. She had also learned that silence, when misread, could be her enemy. A whisper might begin in the kitchen, perhaps a servant misheard a private conversation, or perhaps a rival lady in waiting wished to wound another's pride. A single sentence, reshaped and retold, would climb upward through the castle like smoke. By dusk, it might reach the council chamber. By dawn, it might reach the city gates. And by the week's end, it would reach foreign courts, dressed in scandal. A smile held too long, a letter sent too quietly, a gown worn in the wrong color, each could be turned into a story. The queen knew this, and so she learned the art of guardedness. Her words became measured, her gestures calm. She spoke gently to those around her, but never too intimately. The people saw grace, the courtiers saw mystery, and both were safer than truth. Still, she was human, and humans, even the most disciplined, craved to be understood. Sometimes, in the soft safety of evening, she would confide in one trusted attendant, a woman from her homeland, perhaps, or an older nurse who had known her before the crown. She might speak of her childhood garden, the scent of lilac, the small freedom of climbing trees without permission. Simple memories, harmless things. Yet even these words felt like rebellion in a world that measured every breath. But not all who listened were kind. A court is a theater of masks, and the queen's every listener was an actor. There were spies in velvet sleeves, emissaries disguised as companions, even holy men who traded secrets for influence. Some came with smiles, some with blessings, all with motives. And so the queen learned to read faces as one might read scripture, carefully, reverently, searching for hidden meaning. She could see deceit in the flick of an eyelash, danger in a twig or bough. Every compliment was weighed, every invitation examined. Her life became a quiet chessboard where every piece moved with invisible hands. The king, absorbed in wars and councils, did not see the web tightening around his wife. To him, the queen was serenity, itself a figure of composure who kept his court in balance. But beneath that calm surface, she moved through a labyrinth of whispers that could undo everything. Sometimes, she felt the fear beneath her ribs like a bird beating its wings. What if they accused her of plotting? What if they said she had too much influence over the king? History had taught her the price of such suspicions. Queens had been confined, cast out, even executed for less. One winter, an envoy from a rival realm arrived. He was charming, eloquent, dangerous. His words carried honey, but his letters carried secrets. He flattered her with knowledge of her homeland, of poets she had loved in youth. She smiled politely, but her mind stayed alert. When he left the court weeks later, rumors bloomed like frost. The queen was seen walking in the garden with him, under moonlight. A lie, perhaps, but one that would cling. She knew better than to defend herself. In the world of courts, denial only fed curiosity. Instead, she maintained silence and waited for the next intrigue to distract them all. Patience was her shield, time her ally. The queen who survived was the one who learned not to chase rumors, but to let them die of neglect. Yet there were moments brief. Fajal, when the weight of this vigilance grew too much, when she would look from her window at the distant forest, at the dark ribbon of the river winding away, and wonder what it might feel like to be unknown again, to walk through a market with no one watching, to speak a word without it being weighed like gold. She often found comfort in the chapel's quiet corners. There, no one dared to whisper. The flicker of candles, the scent of wax and stone, the echo of her footsteps on marble all felt cleansing. She would kneel, not to confess guilt, but to release the heavy silence that wrapped around her heart. The priest would ask, "Do you seek forgiveness, my queen?" And she would answer softly, "I seek peace," for in truth, she had done no wrong. Her only crime was existing in a world that mistrusted women with wisdom, grace, and strength. Over time, she found her own quiet form of rebellion, kindness. When the court expected her to favor cruelty, she offered mercy. When gossip sought to divide her attendants, she drew them together and shared work embroidery for the poor, care for the sick, prayers for the lost. Whispers have little power where compassion lives. And so, the queen built a small circle of loyalty that could not be bought. A few hearts, steadfast and true, became her unseen guard against the world's noise. For, in the end, power is not always loud. Sometimes, it whispers back. As the night deepens, the queen stands by her window, watching snow fall over the courtyard. The world outside lies hushed, pure, unjudging. She thinks, for a moment, that perhaps the snow understands what no one else can. That silence, too, can be holy. She turns away from the window, her candlelight flickering across the stone. The castle sleeps. The whispers fade, for tonight, at least, she has peace. Morning light seeps softly through the stained glass windows, spilling colors across the queen's chamber, floor ruby, sapphire, and gold. The world awakens around her, and with it, another day of preparation begins. Before her stands a small army of attendants ladizin, maids, hairdressers, perfumers. They move like quiet waves, each with a task. One brushes her hair until it shines like polished bronze. Another dusts her face with the faintest powder. A third laces her gown with careful precision, pulling each ribbon so that her posture appears effortless, her breathing calm, and through it all, the queen remains still. This ritual is not vanity, it is duty. In the medieval world, a queen's beauty was not her own. It belonged to the realm. Her appearance was a language, one that spoke of the kingdom's power, its prosperity, its grace. If she looked radiant, people believed the kingdom was blessed. If she looked tired, they whispered that the nation was faltering. Her face became the weather of the court, and her smile its fragile season. The weight of that performance was invisible, but constant. Her mirror small and slightly warped shows her reflection as the world expects her to be, perfect. But behind the mirror, behind the veil of silk and ceremony, is fatigue, a weariness that no crown can hide. The irony, of course, was that beauty, for queens, was never safety. Throughout history, beauty invited both admiration and danger. A beautiful queen could inspire songs and paintings, but she could also inspire jealousy, suspicion, or worse, obsession. Courtiers would compare her to saints and goddesses in their flattery, but in the same breath, accuse her of witchcraft if her beauty seemed to enduring. A wrinkle, a scar, a touch of age became a political event. The queen learned to smile, even when her cheeks ached, to wear jewels so heavy they bruised her shoulders, to sit still for hours while her hair was twisted into symbols of power. At first, she thought of beauty as armor, something that protected her, something that commanded respect. But as years passed, she began to see it as a kind of golden cage. To remain beautiful was to remain acceptable. To age was to invite dismissal. Once, she had been painted in oils by a master artist. He had knelt before her, mixing pigments of pearl and rose, capturing the delicate curve of her lips, the brightness of her eyes. The finished portrait hung in the great hall for all to see. But as time went on, she found herself glancing at it less and less. The woman in that painting was forever young, forever radiant, forever adored. The real queen, however, had begun to collect quiet lines of wisdom near her eyes. And in the mirror, those lines whispered something no courtier ever dared to say. You are still here. You have lived. It was a thought both comforting and forbidden. The court poets wrote verses praising her fairness, comparing her to lilies and moonlight. Yet, behind their compliments lay an unspoken rule about her worth. Her power to influence, even her ability to be heard, depended on how well she preserved that image. She noticed it most sharply when new faces arrived, young noble women with bright laughter and untried beauty. They reminded her of herself, years ago, when she still thought beauty could change fate. She would watch them glide through the ballroom, surrounded by admiration, and smile with quiet sadness, for she knew what awaited them. The same delicate prison, the same need to stay perfect for a world that never truly saw the soul beneath the surface. And sometimes, late at night, when all the mirrors were covered for sleep and only the candlelight flickered against the walls, she would let herself breathe freely. She would touch her face, feel the warmth of her own skin, and whisper to herself not a queen's words, but a woman's. I am enough as I am. No attendants, no jewels. No jewels does the quiet truth. Outside, the moon would watch her with gentle silence, and the world, for a few hours, would stop demanding that she be beautiful. But daylight always returned, and with it, the mask. Still, something small and steadfast had changed within her. She began to find beauty, not in the flawless mirror, but in the imperfect fleeting things. The way sunlight fell on dust motes. The way her hands trembled slightly as she embroidered, the way laughter, real laughter, felt like rebellion. Her beauty, once a weapon, became something softer, private grace she shared only with herself. And perhaps that was her quiet triumph. To reclaim what the world had taken, and to carry her beauty as truth, not as performance. In the end, history would remember her for her poise, her elegance, her serene face, immortalized in portraits. But beneath that surface, there lived a woman who had finally learned that to be beautiful and to be free were not the same thing, and yet, sometimes, they could coexist in a single, unguarded breath. The night is still. The torches outside her chamber burn low, their flames fluttering in rhythm with the wind that sighs along the battlements. Within the queen's private apartments, all is quiet, too quiet for sleep. It is in these hours, when the castle finally exhales, and the weight of her crown has been set aside, that her thoughts return to the secret places of her heart. To be queen was to belong to everyone, yet to no one. Her body was the realm's promise of heirs, her smile, the balm for her people, her presence, the proof of divine favor. And yet, herself, the quiet, unspoken self, had nowhere to live except in shadow. Every queen, in her own time, learned the art of concealment. Some hid fear, some hid sorrow. Some hid the bright flicker of love, where it was not permitted to burn. Our queen carried all three. Her marriage, though noble and proper, was never tender. The king, a man of duty and ambition, spoke more to his counsel than to his wife. When he did speak to her, it was with courtesy rather than warmth. There were moments rare, small moments, when she glimpsed the young man he once had been, the one who laughed freely before war and worry hardened his eyes. But those moments passed quickly, swallowed by the tide of politics. She did not hate him. In truth, she pitied him, for the same crown that caged her bound him as well. They were two souls walking parallel paths, close in distance, far in understanding. In the long stretches of silence between them, her heart began to wander toward other memories. Sometimes she thought of the boy she had known before marriage, a distant cousin, a childhood companion, someone who had taught her how to ride and how to laugh without restraint. She wondered if he still lived, if he still thought of her when spring returned. She could never write to him. That would have been scandal. But in her dreams, she sometimes found him waiting in the old meadow, beneath the wide blue sky of her youth. Other times, her heart ached for the children she had lost. A queen's womb was a matter of state, and every miscarriage was treated not as grief, but as failure. The court spoke in whispers, pitying or accusing, never comforting. She had learned to smile through those losses too, to appear unbroken even as her body trembled with sorrow. But when she prayed alone, she would whisper the names she had chosen, for them names that no one else knew. Names never written in the royal records, never spoken aloud. In those whispered syllables, she kept their memory alive. Sometimes, a different sorrow visited her, the sorrow of seeing too much. To watch young women married for alliances, their eyes wide with fear. To hear the cries of peasants outside the castle walls and know she could not truly reach them. To smile at courtiers who despised her and pretend she did not see it. This, too, was the quiet suffering of queenship, the constant act of holding compassion in a world that rewarded cruelty. But amid the weight of sorrow, she also kept secrets of joy small, fleeting, but real. The laughter of her ladies when they told stories by candlelight, the scent of rain through the open window, the way the king, in rare moments of weariness, would fall asleep beside her with his hand just touching hers, not out of passion, but of shared fatigue. Those small touches of humanity were the stars in her long night. One spring morning, years into her reign, a painter was commissioned to capture her likeness again. He was young, quiet, observant. He asked to paint her not in the grand hall, but by the window, in natural light. She agreed. As he worked, they spoke of art, of light, of how colors fade when trapped in shadow. He told her that true portraits were not of faces, but of souls. She looked at him, startled by the gentleness of his tone. For the first time in years, she felt Chin not as a queen, but as a woman. She never spoke of it to anyone, not even to her confessor. It was not love, not truly, but it was a remembrance, a reminder that her heart could still feel, still wake, still belong to her. When the portrait was finished, she looked at it and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition. He had painted not the queen, but her. The faint sadness in her eyes, the calm she had built over years of storms, the quiet dignity that came from surviving what no one saw. She thanked him softly. He bowed, and in that silence, a secret understanding passed between them, pure, wordless, human. That night, as the castle slept, she stood before the painting alone. She whispered to it, as if to a friend, "You know me, even if history never will." And in that moment, her sorrow eased, not because it vanished, but because she had finally shared it, even if only with paint and canvas. The queen's life would continue in duty and silence, but within her heart, there now lived a small rebellion. A belief that even in the loneliest life, beauty and tenderness could still bloom in hidden places. The years passed quietly, like pages turned by unseen hands. The queen's hair, once a deep and gleaming hue, has begun to silver softly at the temples. Her hands, those same hands that once trembled in fear on her wedding, they now move with a measured calm. Each gesture is slow, deliberate, assured. Taima, that silent sculptor, has touched her gently. She no longer tries to fight its work. Outside, the realm has changed. New nobles have risen. Others have fallen. The courtiers, who once whispered against her, are older too, their ambition dulled by fatigue. The king's fire has dimmed, his health uncertain. Wars have been fought, treaties signed, sons and daughters grown. And through it all, the queen has remained steady, constant, like the bell tower that still tolls the same number of hours each day, no matter who listens. But inside her, something has shifted. The vanity that once clung to beauty has given way to wisdom. The fear that once followed every whisper has melted into quiet acceptance. She has lived long enough to see how swiftly gossip fades, how memory reshapes what once seemed unbearable. Her court still expects perfection, yet she offers something different now. Calm truth. She no longer hides every emotion. A sigh, a small smile, even a tear are no longer weaknesses. They are the privileges of one who has endured, and people begin to love her differently for it. The young ladies, once frightened of her poise, now come to her for counsel. They sit at her feet as she embroiders, listening to her stories not of grandeur but of patience. She tells them that gentleness is not surrender, and that silence, when chosen, can be power. She teaches them that beauty fades, but dignity, the kind that comes from kindness, endures, beyond portraits and crowns. The courtiers, too, have soft. They now speak her name with respect, not fear. Even those who once plotted against her come to her for advice, drawn by the serenity she carries. It is strange, she thinks, how time can turn enemies into mourners. In her later years, she spends more time in the palace gardens. There, the air smells of lavender and wet earth, and the world feels softer. Sometimes, she removes her gloves and runs her fingers through the soil, unbothered by what others might say. It reminds her of her childhood home, the one with fields of lilac and rain-slicked stones. When her attendants scold her gently for it, she only smiles. A queen must know what her land feels like, she tells them, and though they laugh, they understand she means something deeper. The king, now frail and grey, calls her to his side more often. There is a tenderness between them at last, quiet understanding built not on passion, but on shared history. Two people who have weathered the same storms and outlived so many others. Sometimes they sit in silence, hands barely touching, and that small contact feels more intimate than any word. In the quiet of the chapel, she begins to think about legacy, not the kind carved in marble, but the kind that lives in memory. What will they say of her, she wonders. When she is gone, will they remember her as beautiful, wise, pious, or simply as a woman who endured? She hopes it will be the last, because endurance, she knows now, is the truest form of courage. History will write her name alongside kings and battles, but history will not know the thousand small moments that shaped her. The letters she never sent, the tears she wiped before anyone could see, the kindnesses she offered in quiet defiance of cruelty. Those moments will fade from record but not, perhaps, from hearts. One day, a young servant new to the castle asks her softly, "Your Majesty, what is it like to be queen?" The queen pauses, her gaze drifting toward the window where rain streaks down the glass. "It is like holding light in your hands," she says. "Beautiful, but impossible to keep." Then, seeing the girl's puzzled face, she smiles. "And so you learn to love the warmth it gives, even as it slips away." That night, she writes a letter not to anyone, but to time itself. She sets her pen to parchment and writes the truths she never spoke aloud. She writes of loneliness and love, of power and patience, of the strange quiet joy that comes when one stops fighting to be remembered and simply begins to be. When she finishes, she seals the letter but does not send it. Instead, she hides it among the pages of her prayer book, between verses about mercy and grace. Perhaps one day, someone will find it, a granddaughter, a historian, a curious maiden glimpse the woman behind the crown. But even if no one ever does, she feels at peace, because now, at last, she understands that the legacy of a queen is not what she leaves behind in stone or story, it is what she preserves in the hearts of others while she still lives. Her laughter, when it comes, is quiet and unguarded. It fills the chamber like soft sunlight. Outside, autumn has begun to turn the gardens gold. The leaves drift down like blessings, and the air smells faintly of endings but gentle ones. The queen sits by her window, her fingers resting on the sill. The world below moves on. Children play, bells ring, the city breathes. She watches it all with a tender, distant smile, the smile of someone who has finally made peace with time. The castle is hushed tonight. The halls, once alive with the laughter of courtiers and the clatter of silver dishes, now lie under the soft weight of silence. Candles flicker along the corridor, their flames trembling faintly with every whisper of wind from the old stone walls. In the queen's chambers, the air is cool and still. The great bed, carved with vines and lilies, stands ready, curtains drawn back to let in the last silver of moonlight. A fire burns low in the hearth, just enough to fill the room with a drowsy warmth. The queen sits by the window, as she often does, wrapped in a shawl of pale wool. Her hair, white now, falls loose about her shoulders. On the table beside her rests a single cup of warm milk, half finished, and her prayer book, open to the same page she marked so many years ago. She looks out at the courtyard below, where the fountain glimmers faintly. The sound of its falling water is soft, steady, eternal, like the rhythm of breathing. How strange, she thinks, that this same courtyard once rang with trumpets and cheers. That once, long ago, she stood there as a young bride, trembling with both fear and hope, unaware of what awaited her. She smiles faintly at the thought. If that young woman could see her now, tired, perhaps, but at peace, she wonders what she would think. Maybe she would be surprised that she survived it all, that she endured heartbreak, betrayal, loss, and still learned to love the quiet of her own company. That the crown she once feared became merely a part of her as symbol she could wear without letting it consume her. Her life, she realizes, has been a tapestry of contrasts, splendor and solitude, duty and desire, glory and grief. Each thread, even the darkest one, has woven her into what she is. From the adjoining room, she can hear the soft shuffle of her ladies-in-waiting. They think she's asleep. She doesn't call them. There is something sacred in this stillness, something she wishes to keep just for herself. She lifts her gaze to the night sky. Beyond the window, stars scatter across the darkness, thousands of them, shimmering like the jewels she once wore on coronation days. But these are better, she thinks. They shine for no court, no ceremony, no applause. They simply exist silent, enduring, eternal. The moonlight catches her wedding ring. How many years has it been now since the king's passing? She has lost count. His absence no longer feels sharp. It is a soft echo, a memory that brings no pain. She wonders if somewhere, in whatever lies beyond, he still thinks of her, if he too has found peace. She leans back, her head resting gently against the chair. The rhythm of her breathing is slow, deep, and even. She feels no fear. Death, she realizes, is not a thief. It is a visitor, one she has been expecting for some time. A courteous guest who knocks softly at the door, waiting to be let in. Her thoughts drift to her children, to the letters they still send from faraway lands, to the laughter of her grandchildren echoing through the corridors. During their rare visits, they will carry the bloodline forward, she knows. But more than that, she hopes they will carry her gentleness, the lesson that true strength is found not in power, but in patience. She reaches for her prayer book. Her fingers find the folded letter she hid there long ago. She runs her hand over it, but does not open it. There is no need. She remembers every word. With a faint sigh, she sets it back and closes the book. The fire crackles softly. The scent of lavender drifts from the linen on her bed. Somewhere outside, an owl calls, low and distant. The queen closes her eyes, and for a moment, she imagines she is once again that young girl walking through the lilac fields of her childhood. The sky is clear. The air smells of rain. She hears her mother's laughter, the bells of the village church, the soft rustle of skirts through grass. She walks toward the sound of water, the same sound that fills her courtyard now. Feels the world grow lighter around her, as though she is being carried on the breeze itself. No crown weighs on her head. No court waits for her command. She is simply herself. And that, at last, is enough. The night deepens, the candles burn low. When the morning comes, the maids will find her still seated by the window, her face turned toward the dawn, her expression peaceful. The letter in her prayer book will remain untouched for years, until one day it is found, and those who read it will weep softly, not for the loss of a queen, but for the beauty of her endurance. In time, songs will be written about her. Painters will capture her calm eyes. Historians will speak of her grace. But the truest legacy she leaves behind is quieter than that. It is the way her people speak her name, not with reverence, but with warmth. The way they remember that once upon a time, there lived a queen who was kind, and somewhere, beyond the edge of time, her spirit walks again through the fields of lilac and rain, free at last, and forever at peace.